The United Nations humanitarian coordinator for Somalia calls for a major scale-up in resources to prevent famine. Plus, Britain's Prince Charles pays respect at Rwanda Genocide Memorial and meets with survivors. Hello and welcome to the program today. I'm Layo Olarinde. We begin here in West Africa. The military junta in Burkina Faso has, in a surprise move, met with the ousted president he overthrew in a coup last January. Former President Roch-Marc Christian Kabore was accompanied by another former president, Jean-Baptiste Ouedraogo, during the meeting at the presidential palace. Officials say the meeting is to show Lieutenant Colonel Paul Henry Damiba's desire for reconciliation and that the country's security situation was discussed. A statement also adds that Mr. Kabore was there to discuss security issues and to try to defuse the political situation in the country. Back in January, Lieutenant Colonel Damiba said he had toppled Mr. Kabore because he had failed to stop the attacks by jihadist fighters. Well, despite a promise to improve security, the violence has continued in Burkina Faso. The military ruler has also controversially declared a 3-year transition period before elections. Malawi's president, Lazarus Chakwera, has stripped his vice president, Saulos Chilima, of all his delegated powers after the latter was named in a $150 million corruption scandal involving government contracts. A report by the country's anti-corruption bureau named 53 current and former officials as having received money from British Malawian businessman Zuneth Sata between 2017 and 2021. Well, this is in relation to 16 contracts that were awarded to 5 companies belonging to Mr. Sata. The officials named in the report include the vice president and also the head of police, who has been sacked. But Malawi's law does not allow the president to sack or suspend his own vice president, as the latter is an elected official. The United Nations humanitarian coordinator for Somalia is calling for a major scale-up in resources to prevent famine in the country. This comes after witnessing the consequences of drought during a joint visit with the Horn of Africa country's drought envoy. Mr. Adam Abdelmoula, who's the humanitarian coordinator for Somalia, says the humanitarian situation continues to deteriorate rapidly. Somalia has suffered through 4 unprecedented and consecutive failed rainy seasons, something that had never happened in the country's history. Well, currently, it faces a potential 5th failed rainy season. Mr. Abdelmoula was speaking in Dolo, located in Somalia's southern federal member state of Jubaland, where he visited new settlements of internally displaced persons and health centers, and also met with community elders and humanitarian partners. Each morning in the Somali border town of an 11-year-old boy, Bashir Nur Salat, plots his day's mission behind a crooked wire fence. Well, he, like millions of others in Somalia, are in the crosshairs of what some aid workers are calling the 3 C's, as the climate change, costs and conflict.
In Somalia's Dolo, Bashir Nur Salat is on a mission. There was no breakfast this morning, nor dinner last night. But now the 11-year-old and his friends have their sights set on lunch. To get what they need to sneak into the Kabasa Primary School, where meals are provided to students as part of a UN-supported program.
I'm so hungry, I lie down and I can't sleep. Sometimes they give us food and sometimes they do not give us anything.
The UN says at least 448 children have died since January while being treated for acute malnutrition. That's likely to be a fraction of the true number of deaths. Bashir, his 8 siblings and mother Halima Ibrahim Mahdi arrived in Dolo 3 months ago. Their goats and cattle had been reduced to scorched bones, scattered over the cracked earth. While survival is his main priority, Bashir also dreams of going to school.
I want to go to school. I want to learn every language. I will work for an international organization and have a big car.
Halima says they've never seen a drought like this and never before been forced to leave their land. The family is among 6 million Somalis. That's more than a third of the population relying on emergency food aid to survive. Abdi Rahman Abdishakur Warsame, Somalia's special envoy for drought, says action is needed to prevent a famine.
That all the human life are equal, and I see that the international community are paying, particularly the Western nations, are paying more attention to the Ukraine than the other crises or other, like Somali droughts. So we urge the international community to pay attention to this drought before it becomes famine.
Dolo is one of Somalia's safest towns and therefore best served by international aid. Kabasa Primary gets 41 cents per student a day to provide 2 meals, but at least 50 extra children arrive each day hoping for food. Torn between duty to their pupils and the crisis outside the school's walls, teachers sometimes push the arrivals away and sometimes turn a blind eye. Somalia is struggling with its worst drought in 40 years after 4 consecutive rainy seasons failed. With school now closed for 2 months, hungrier times lie ahead.
Well, let's take you back to one of our leading stories for today. In Malawi, where the president, Chakwera, has stripped his vice president of all his delegated powers, Yvonne Sundu, Malawian journalist, joins us now from Lilongwe for more on this. Hello, Yvonne. Thank you for speaking to us.
You're welcome.
Well, help us understand this, the implication of President Chakwera's action on his deputy.
Well, what it means, obviously, is that the vice president is going to be ineffective because it's no longer going to be delegated in terms of representing Malawi at different maybe conferences, activities. It means the president will be taking those roles or probably delegating other ministers. So in essence, the vice president will be there, but it's just going to be a figurehead until investigations in this issue are over and then he's been cleared that he was not involved in issues to do with corruption. Otherwise, we'll have a president who effectively is not there. And like you mentioned, the vice president cannot be fired because this is a constitutionally provided office where when we are going to the polls, we elect, as a country, we elect a president as well as the vice president. If it was a position where the president handpicks, after being voted into power, handpicks the vice president, then what would have happened probably would have been the president firing the vice president.
Well, from what you've said, Yvonne, it appears this will leave the vice president redundant, so to speak. He's neither sacked, but he will not be working. But for how long do we expect this to be?
Considering that this is a court case, then obviously what it means is until when the court issue is over and then the court finds him not to have been involved in these corruption practices. But as long as this court issue is in the Malawian courts and then probably is dragging, this withdrawal of duties remains to be in effect.
So let's talk about the people now, how Malawians are reacting to this.
Well, it's mixed reactions considering the fact that the Malawi government right now is formed by a coalition of different parties. But the main parties are the Malawi Congress Party, to which the president belongs to, and the UTM, to which the vice president belongs to. So in a way, it pits these two main political parties against each other. So you have supporters of the vice president who are saying they are standing behind the vice president until the courts prove him otherwise. Then you have supporters of the My Congress Party, which the president belongs to, celebrating because the issue is it has been in the public domain for the past 3 weeks that the name of the vice president was mentioned to be among his government officials to have benefited from this Zunet Sata man. Therefore, since that time, the supporters of the Malawi Congress Party had been celebrating because to them, much as these two political parties are in power sharing agreement of some sort, but the supporters are not really into it. And also, then we have a group of Malawians that are anxiously looking forward to seeing how this issue ends. These are people that are more of neutral observers. They no longer they don't belong to MCP, neither to the UTM, but these are just ordinary Malawians who are following critically the issue to see how it ends. Is the vice president going to be found, in the wrong? And if he's not found in the wrong, how does the Malawi government move forward? Or is he going to be found on the wrong side of the law? If that is the case, how does Malawi government and then Malawi as a country seek to move forward from that scenario? So it's a sort of a mixed bag, but for most Malawians, what they want to see is how this issue comes to the end.
Yeah, we'll just have to wait and see how it all pans out. But thank you, Yvonne Sundu, a Malawian journalist.
Thank you.
Egypt has signed a raft of deals with Saudi Arabia worth nearly $8 billion as during a visit to Cairo by the Gulf Kingdom's de facto ruler, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. The government said in a statement that this deal includes a $1.5 billion investment in a wind power plant in Egypt. Well, this was the Saudi Crown Prince's first tour outside the Gulf for 3 years. He's now in Turkey for talks with the leaders of... He's supposed to travel to Jordan, then he's now in Turkey in what will be the latest step in restoring ties that damaged by the killing of the Saudi journalist in 2018, Jamal Khashoggi. The VOA's correspondent in Cairo, Edward Yeranian, joins us now for more discussions. Hello, Edward. Thank you for speaking to us. Deals worth nearly $8 billion, that is to include a wind power plant investment. Talk to us about, other investments that are involved in this.
Both parties emphasized that they were investing in infrastructure. One of the key deals that appears to have fallen through that everyone was talking about not so long ago was building a bridge between Saudi Arabia and Egypt. That proved either to be politically or technically difficult to do. So it seems to be off the drawing board. Saudi Arabia is building its NEOM, its new area, which is very close to Egypt. So they're obviously interested in that area. So they would like to see people coming and traveling between both areas. Tourism, there's a lot of tourism going on between both sides. Many of the Cairo hotels are practically full of Saudis. Many of them are not going to Lebanon as they used to do. Also, there's a lot of oil infrastructure as well as just oil products that are sold between by Saudi Arabia to Egypt, which is very important since Egypt's own oil resources are dwindling, even though it has a lot of natural gas supplies. Oil is kind of short. And then Saudi Arabia also invests in various housing projects, as do the United Arab Emirates. So those are historic projects that continue. And then I'm sure a few other things I've forgotten.
All right, then. Edward Yeranian, VOA's correspondent in Cairo. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Still ahead on the program. Tooth belonging to murdered Congolese independence leader Patrice Lumumba returns to the Democratic Republic of Congo from Belgium. Please stay with us. Welcome back to the program. The European Union has urged Ethiopia's government to lift restrictions on fuel supplies to the war-wrecked Tigray region, warning that shortages were crippling the distribution of emergency aid. Well, the EU's Commissioner for Crisis Management, Janez Lenarik, made the appeal after a visit to Tigray's capital, Mekelle. The 19-month conflict between Prime Minister Abiy's government and Tigrayan rebels has driven hundreds of thousands of people to the brink of famine and left more than 9 million in need of food aid. After the government announced a humanitarian truce in March, aid convoys slowly made their way to Tigray for the first time since mid-December. But fuel shortages due to government restrictions have severely limited access to life-saving supplies, even as aid warehouses are still full. The Prince of Wales has met survivors and perpetrators of the Rwandan genocide ahead of a summit of Commonwealth leaders. Prince Charles and the Duchess of Cornwall visited a memorial and church outside the capital Kigali, where the remains of victims are buried. Back in 1994, ethnic Hutu extremists slaughtered hundreds of thousands of members of the Tutsi community. Well, this trip marks the first royal visit to Rwanda. The Prince of Wales and the Duchess of Cornwall arrived on Tuesday night to Rwanda. That's one of a minority of nations the Queen has not visited. Prince Charles is representing the Queen, the head of the Commonwealth, at the Summit of Commonwealth Leaders, which was postponed in 2021 and 2020 because of the COVID-19 pandemic. The African Union has suspended its participation in the UN-facilitated talks to end the Sudan political crisis. Its representative in the talks says lack of transparency and exclusion of important political actors from the process is their reason. Local media quotes the AU representative in Khartoum, Mohamed Belaish, as saying that the African Union cannot participate in the process that is not based on transparency, honesty and non-exclusion. He says the AU would not participate in the process that does not respect all the actors and treat them with full respect and on an equal footing. The AU and the regional bloc, Intergovernmental Authority on Development, had previously backed the UN-led intra-Sudanese dialogue process that began on the 8th of June. Well, the dialogue was, however, postponed indefinitely a few days later after the former ruling Forces of Freedom and Change, FFC, coalition refused to join its sessions. Well, as Sudan's economy slows to a crawl, traffic light systems have broken down in Khartoum, causing deadlocks at junctions and blackouts through the night. Well, the finance minister says the government is sticking to economic reforms while acknowledging that it is struggling to absorb the economic impact of the war in Ukraine and also to replace international financing frozen after a coup in October.
An accelerated breakdown in services, including water and electricity supplies, has left Sudanese citizens counting the cost of political stalemate after a military takeover last October. The slide in living conditions comes after the coup triggered the suspension of billions of dollars in international funding, and at a time when the war in Ukraine has pushed the cost of key imports higher. It has led to anti-military demonstrations held at least once a week for the past 8 months, while also adding to pressure for the military and civilian groups to come to a political agreement. Authorities say they are pressing on with economic reforms that the civilian-led government began under International Monetary Fund's monitoring in 2020, aimed at reducing subsidies seen as inflationary, but government spending has gone even higher. Across the White Nile from the capital Khartoum, Residents crowding private tankers selling water said their local water supply has been dry for weeks now.
As you can see, the water pipes are empty. In summer, it's another story. There's absolutely no water.
Roads in the neighborhood were dotted with stagnant green pools of water and uncollected rubbish. Inflation has eased slightly but remains at 192%, and that's according to official numbers. Last week, the World Food Programme warned that 15 million people, or about a third of the population, face acute food insecurity. Officials at Khartoum's Water Authority blame a lack of government funding to maintain water stations and pipes for a growing population. According to the Sudanese Finance Minister, Jibril Ibrahim, government subsidizes electricity, but there's a supply deficit which authorities hope to fill through foreign investments and renewable energy.
We had big plans for electricity, rural development, and irrigation projects, which could have helped employ a number of young people.
Western donors say suspended economic assistance will only return after the appointment of a credible civilian administration. This month, the civilian coalition that shared power with the military before the coup began meeting with the generals in an effort to break the political deadlock in a United States and Saudi-backed effort. But protest leaders still refuse to negotiate with the military, and many demonstrators blame the armed forces for their economic woes.
The UN Humanitarian Agency has issued an alert on the deteriorating situation for millions of mainly women and children in northeast Nigeria who continue to be affected by protracted armed conflict just as the country enters the lean season. Or the top relief official in Nigeria, Matthias Shmale, says although the Boko Haram militia has been significantly weakened since the group's leader was killed over a year ago, it continues to carry out indiscriminate attacks. The UN estimates that well over 8 million people are in need of assistance in Borno, Adamawa, and Yobe states, and an estimated 600,000 face emergency levels of food insecurity because of extremist violence centered around the Lake Chad region that's now in its 12th year.
A key message is ringing the alarm bell. And what I mean by that is if we don't get immediate funding soon for an initial multi-sector response plan worth $350 million, we will have a crisis that will be much worse in a couple of months. There are 600,000 people are projected to be at emergency risk list level in terms of food insecurity. Now, this is all happening in the context of a protracted crisis caused by a non-international armed conflict, as many as you will know, across the 3 states in the northeast, in Nigeria, Borno, Adamawa, and Yobe states. We've been asking to support out of the 8.4 million people in need of support, at least 5.5 million. The conflict has left 2.2 million people presently displaced. We've just entered what is called the lean season that normally lasts till September. Last year it lasted till November, so we're also seeing the impact of climate change.
Africa is set to have its first ever African-owned COVID-19 vaccine within the next 3 years after going through full clinical trials. Well, developers say the mRNA vaccine will be stored at temperatures used in regular refrigerators, making it easier to store and distribute in rural and remote locations where fewest people are currently vaccinated. Well, development and production of this new vaccine is expected to take place in Cape Town, South Africa. The announcement comes after the World Trade Organization, WTO, reached a deal to waive a crucial intellectual property agreement, making it easier for developing countries to manufacture and export patented COVID vaccines without consent from the patent holder for 5 years. And as we end the program today, a tooth belonging to murdered Congolese independence leader Patrice Lumumba has arrived in the Democratic Republic of Congo from Belgium and is being taken on a tour of his homeland. The tooth was returned to Lumumba's family at a ceremony in Brussels on Monday. Well, it is all that remains of the country's first prime minister, who was assassinated in 1961 by rebels in collusion with Belgian mercenaries, and his body dissolved in acid. The tooth will first go to the town of his birth, named Lumumbaville, in his honor, then to Kisangani, where he started his political activism, and then to Lumbashi, where he was killed. A coffin containing the tooth will finally be laid to rest in the capital, Kinshasa, on the 29th of June, the eve of DRC's Independence Day. And that's it on the program today. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Layo Olarinde.